Welcome to the No Limits podcast, where breakthrough strategies in therapeutic education help neurodivergent children learn, connect, and grow in powerful new ways.
Welcome to the No Limits podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about communication. I'm Laura Jocelyn, and I'm here with Chris Carey, who's a speech-language pathologist at Ability Plus Therapy. She's also the director of communications for No Limits Academy, which is a school for physically disabled children. And she's one of the content creators for No Limits Method. Hi, Chris. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So in this parent and professional collaboration that we have with the No Limits Method, where, I see the problems that are happening in the school system and in other parts of life where professionals aren't speaking together for one voice, for our kids. Communication is one of our top core values. So today we're gonna talk about how that affects everything with a child and their education, and we've seen that over and over again, and Chris, why is it so important that a nonverbal child receives communication? You've seen every aspect of that.
Well, it's huge if we think about why we communicate. We communicate to get our needs met. We communicate desires that we have, things that we want to do, what we want to eat, that we're hungry. Our nonverbal children, without given some form of communication, just sit in their chairs kind of locked in, and we just assume what they need. Absolutely. So we assume what their needs are, and we try to meet their needs the best way. So without giving them the ability to communicate, they're just stuck.
Right. And I have to say, from a parent's perspective, what I saw, and I met a little boy in the school system, in the hallway, and I could just see in his eyes, he was very bright. And I thought, and I'm like, I'm looking in his backpack, and I find a device. It's a pretty simple device. It was a long time ago since, I'm old. So, and I pulled it out, and I started, I was a volunteer in the school system, so I literally started talking to the speech therapist, and she says, yeah, we're working on certain things with him in speech. But then I went to the teacher and I said, how does this work in your classroom for him? Because I saw he didn't have any advocacy. There was no one advocating for him. And that's when I realized that speech therapists and the teachers just weren't communicating with each other. And I was like, oh no. Because that just didn't bring it to the end user or the child, and I'm like, that's devastating, because you're in an educational environment not being spoke to or being able to speak to your education, and when we started No Limits Academy, that was one of the bigger things that, you were on board first. You were like, I want these two things to happen, because then we create, that child becomes more of a person if you can get that communication back and forth, and they have a right to, which I know you can speak on.
So it's empowering, especially so our children that have devices, it's really important to understand that these are not just computers. If it's a high-tech device or if it's a communication book with pictures, it's not just a tool, it's a voice.
Yeah.
So it's not something that we do just in class or just in speech therapy. It's something that goes with them wherever they go, like our voice. Our voice goes wherever we go. It's essential for life to be able to communicate.
Right. And that has to transfer to the parents. And actually, in that case, I actually called the parents, and I talked to them, and they had no idea what to do with the device, right? So then there's that break. So there's not a blaming of any one person. No. There is a blaming of, like, why don't we know these things all are going to connect, right? So that we can get better outcomes for these kids. These kids live a life and they have value and worth, right? And unless you have the ability to communicate, you don't have the ability. People just do things for you, right? Right. Like here at No Limits Academy, that's one of the things that we teach our paraprofessionals, Don't talk over them, talk with them.
Right.
You know,
Don't talk at them.
Right. Where is their device at lunch and in the bathroom, and like, you know, having them make choices, and, you know, yes, you have to take that device. Yes, you have to do that. Yes.
Yeah.
So the training is critical, you know, and that's for all kids that are nonverbal, whether you're, you know, cerebral palsy, or whether you're Down syndrome, or you're autism. It's so critical to see who they are and who they become.
Right.
Actually,
Right.
you know, I mean, there's been times here that we, you know, parents thought the kids like grape juice, and they don't like grape juice.
Right.
You know, they
Right.
didn't like the color pink. We
Right.
thought, you're a girl, you should like pink. No, they like blue, you know, and to find that and unlock that is just huge.
It's empowering. You know,
Yeah.
I like to tell them, you're the boss. You tell
Yeah.
me you're the boss of your own life. Talk to me. Tell me what you want. Tell me what's happening. Tell your teacher you don't like that. Otherwise, they, like you said, people just do for them, and they may or may not like it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And also like that worth and value of a
Yes.
child.
Yes.
Right. I mean, really, you have to think about it, right? Because I like being locked in. I mean, I describe it this way. I know a lot. I shock people when I say this, but think about, you're in a glass coffin, kind of, and you're looking around, because I have to relate it to some fear that you would have. So you're in a glass coffin, right? And you're screaming, I'm not, you know, I'm here, I'm here. And no one's hearing you
Yeah.
because you're not getting what you need to tell them who you are.
Yeah.
They presume
Yeah.
that they just know everything, or they have their own language, you know, or the family has their own language. And then they come here and that language doesn't transfer.
Right.
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 Speak on that, because that's huge, because I see that a lot of times. And one, we want to give them a voice
Yeah.
so they don't feel like they're like that. That's scary.
Yeah.
And then we want to not, you know, just rely on a family voice.
Right.
Like,
right.
you know,
So that I hear that a lot when families come in and they start speech therapy for their nonverbal child, that, well, we understand what they're saying. So that's okay. And
Yeah.
they're content with that. But like you said, they come into the school, and we don't understand, you know, their family language. So we
or
have
a
to
public
learn-
school would
or the public, the public school. So we work as a team to build a language that we can all understand, that the child can take outside of here, they can take home, they can take to the doctor's office.
Right.
So what if we're presuming that behavior of theirs means that they have a stomach ache, but it really means they have an earache?
Yeah, because you had that experience.
Yeah.
you
So
know?
we want to make sure that we all understand what their message is. So we teach them these messages with whatever way works for that child.
Right.
So that they can go out in the community and they can advocate for themselves. The doctor's office is huge for our kids. They're always in the doctor's office or always at the hospital, and they need to be able to communicate. They know better than anybody what they're feeling.
Right.
So let's give them a way to communicate that.
And as a parent, I know that my biggest fear, you know, in life is pretty much what happens when I'm gone, right? So if you don't give them communication, wherever they are in life, right? If you don't give them that communication, then they don't have anything when you are gone, you know?
Right.
And I know that I'm not the only parent that feels that way, you know? So, but I also realize that a lot of parents come in here and they didn't know that their kid could communicate, you know?
Right.
From not only just local, from all over the world,
Right.
you know? And a PT pulls out a communication device because you've provided that and crossover taught our PTs, right? And then the parent is like crying in our you know, in our gyms, because like that's really important. So I can't stress enough, and that's why it's number one, and that's why you've been on board for all this time, because you and I both agree, if you can't communicate with a child, you can't educate a child.
Right.